Good evening. Today is Wednesday, 9 o'clock. My name is Alina Shoutsova. I am an immigration attorney from New York, and we continue our Legally Speaking series. And today's one is dedicated to citizenship interview. We had previous videos that you can watch, Citizenship 101, that discuss different steps on how to qualify for citizenship or naturalization in the United States. And today I would like to focus on what actually happens at the interview itself. So to come to the point where you're going to be called for an interview, of course, you need to file an application. You need to comply with all the requirements, pay the fee when applicable, and receive your notice. In New York, and I'm going to be talking mostly how the interview happens and the procedure in New York, because that's where I practice most of the time. The interview is usually scheduled approximately within 6 months after one files and submits successful application for naturalization. Let's talk about what happens on the day of the interview. You need to come in on time, and I usually advise my clients to come in about 30 minutes prior to the interview, because you have to go through securities, and yes, each federal immigration place location has nowadays has securities that you have to go through, kind of like security place you have to go through in the airport, and that's why you have to be there well in advance. And then you have to check in. You have to find the floor, you have to find the room where you're going, and you have to check in with a person by giving them your interview appointment notice. And after that, you basically sit and wait for the officer to call you in. And hopefully this wait is not such a long one, but sometimes you do have to wait in for an hour and longer. That's okay. The reason for it is that very often the officers, they get your file and they read your file just before your interview. So they're basically preparing for the interview while you are sitting in the waiting room. So once you are called in, you will be escorted by the officer to the place, to the little room where the officer is going to be interviewing you. Usually the interview starts with the officer asking, swearing you in. Basically, you have to attest that everything that you're going to be testifying will be the truth and nothing but the truth. And then the officer very often asks to see your documents, like a green card or your passports. After that, the officer is going to usually start with the exam portion of the interview. Or prior to that, it depends on the officer basically, but very officer will start with an exam portion if you are not exempt from the test. So mind, you cannot bring an interpreter. This is not the procedure usually where an interpreter is used, because the presumption is if you are applying for citizenship, you are proficient in English enough to pass the test. So what you need to do is, if you don't speak English and you cannot learn English for whatever reasons, and very often there are medical reasons for that, you should talk to a lawyer before you file for your application for naturalization. So let's go back and talk about the citizenship test. How do you prepare for this? Because you are now at the interview, the officer asks for your identification documents, and now the officer goes deep into the process and asks you questions about the test. Well, usually what happens is the officer asks you to write a couple sentences, and the sentences in English, and the sentences are simple. For example, California has the most people, or um, the statute of freedom is in New York, something similar. Those are very simple sentences, nothing crazy. If you do make a mistake, officer always gives you a chance to write a second sentence and see if it was just one word that you did not know how to spell, or the problem is that you really don't have that proficiency in English that is required to pass the test. Then the officer would offer you to read a sentence. And so if you read it successfully, basically, hopefully you will, the officer will proceed with asking history questions related to the history of the United States. How would you know the answers to those questions? Very simple. After you file your application, you will be called for a fingerprints appointment or biometrics appointment. And during that appointment, at least in New York, you will be given a book with the questions and answers and a CD. So it should be relatively easy for you to learn the answers to the questions that the officer is going to be asking you. And from my experience, officers usually quite friendly. And if you mess up one answer, they're going to ask you some more questions just to see that if it was one answer that you did not know, or got too stressed out about answering, or as I said, the problem is deeper, and the problem is that you really did not take your time to prepare. Because do not assume that you will know the answers. Sometimes what you think is an answer is not what the officer wants to hear, because what the officer wants to hear is the answer that was published in that little book. By the way, the questions and answers are also published on USCIS website, and you could easily download them and get prepared. So saying that you were not given the book or something else is not an excuse. You will be questioned, and you will have to provide the correct answers if you'd like to pass your citizenship test. So assuming that went well and you passed it. Oh, by the way, what happens if you didn't pass? Well, if you did not pass a test, the officer will give you a chance to take the test again, and your interview will be rescheduled. So there is no straight denial if you failed your test, English speaking and history test. You will be given an opportunity to retake the test. If you pass the test successfully, then the officer will go over your application. Sometimes it happens before that. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, the officer is going to ask, what is your legal name? And the officer will compare the spelling of your name with the spelling on your birth certificate that should be already on file. Because for most cases, the person during the adjustment of status procedure or immigrant visa procedure would have to submit their certificate with translation, birth certificate with translation. And this what the officer is looking at to see if your name is spelled correctly in the application for naturalization as it is in your birth certificate. Sometimes the name on your green card can be spelled differently than on your birth certificate. For example, a middle name can be omitted. Nevertheless, during the citizenship process, you would have to give them your full name. And if you would like the name the same way it should be spelled as it's spelled in your birth certificate. And if the name is different, or you would like to shorten it, or you would like to omit your middle name, change it in any way, you would have to fill out that portion of the application that says, would you like to change your name? Okay, so the officer will go over that with you. Then the officer, of course, will ask you if you traveled for prolonged periods of time, if outside of the United States during the qualifying period of time. The officer, of course, is going to go through the standard questions that answers yes to which will most likely disqualify you from citizenship. And now I would like to focus my attention on certain of them, on some of them. First of all, if you had convictions in your life ever, even during the juvenile years, you would have to bring the certificates of disposition. That's how they called in New York, or judgments, showing what was the conviction. You will have to present those documents with your application and bring the originals with you during the interview. The officer will ask you about that. Second, what other questions the officer can ask you about? Taxes. Were you paying your taxes? If you owe any taxes. Owing taxes can occur even if you have a payment plan with IRS. So the answer to the question, do you owe any taxes if you have a payment plan with the IRS, should be yes. And then explanation, I have a payment plan. And you bring the documents that IRS gives you to show that you were in fact granted the opportunity to pay the taxes that you own according to the payment plan. Answering no to this question can disqualify you from citizenship. So you have to be very careful here. Other anticipated questions, they will depend on how you received your green card. For example, if somebody received a green card through marriage to a US citizen, prepare to answer questions about your current state of the marriage if you're filing after 3 years being in permanent resident status. Of course, the officer may ask you if you still live with your spouse, what's going on. And some people, and I understand why they would do that, but it's still not right to do that. They would file taxes with their spouse separately. Like they would both file as head of households. And then one of the spouses would like to apply for citizenship. And guess what? That citizenship application will not be granted because you can file separately taxes only if you are not family and you, in fact, do not live together. So expect a denial. You have to check how you're filing your taxes with your spouse before you try to file for your naturalization of citizenship. Other common issue that may arise is connected to good moral character. So make sure that answers that you give to the officer are correct. If you are in doubt, for example, you're not sure whether or not you should disclose an incident that happened in the airport. Maybe you were stopped in the airport. You're not sure if if it was arrest or it was just nothing. It's better to say that you were stopped in the airport because the CBP officers or whoever, customs officers, believe that you were transporting some illegal stuff, and it's not necessarily something serious like weapons. It can be like a piece of sausage, for example, that you decided to brought in from a different country and you were stopped. You would have to disclose this to the officer at the naturalization interview and disclose this fact on your application. If you ever been a member of different groups or organizations, even you were a kid, you have to disclose this to the officer. Do not assume that it does not matter. So basically, you have to answer every question truthfully. Now, for people who received their green card through asylum, be prepared to answer questions related to that topic. Sometimes the officers are going to ask you, they're going to say, well, I see, Mr. So-and-so, that you received asylum because you were afraid of persecution based on your religion. Are you still a member of that church, temple, or whatever the religion was? Do you still attend the meetings? Could you present a letter from the head of that church, temple, mosque that you go to? It happens. You still will have to explain yourself, even if you think it doesn't matter. It does matter. Now, let's focus on cases that come with a waiver. Very often, elderly people, they have difficulties due to many different issues learning English, and they cannot pass English test. Sometimes it's related to developed health issues. Sometimes it's related to the trauma they experienced in their earlier life. There are many other different causes. I'm not a doctor, but what I sometimes tell my clients who come to my office and say they cannot learn English, I say, first of all, have you tried? Have you tried taking classes and trying to pass the test? And if you have, and you notice that something weird happening to you when you're trying to focus, like you cannot focus, like the mind is, just jumping from word to word, from topic to topic, why don't you go and see a doctor who can look at you and examine you and provide administrate different tests, and then tell you if you in fact have certain conditions that would prevent you from learning a foreign language. And in these types of the situation, when the person brings a waiver to the citizenship interview, saying that he or she cannot answer questions in English and cannot pass and should be exempt from English test requirement and English lesson requirement, English language requirement, then the first thing that the officer is going to ask you is that, do you understand what's going on? Could you speak English at all? And then the officer is going to determine whether or not he or she accepts the waiver. And if the waiver is accepted, then the officer will call for an interpreter. And you will have to answer your background questions in your native language. You will not be asked to write or read English. You will not be asked questions about the English history, but you will nevertheless, you will have to answer the questions on your application form that would show your qualifications for the naturalization. So that's the procedure. So basically, my best advice for somebody who is going to have the interview is be well prepared. Don't be nervous. Meet with your attorney in advance and discuss about different possibilities or possible issues and how to address them. And everything should go well. Just be honest and prepared. That's that should be sufficient to pass that interview. It's nothing, it's nothing extraordinary. Some locations, after you pass the interview, actually offer you to be sworn in and receive your certificate of naturalization right then and there. And sometimes people they would be told that officer will mail them an appointment letter when the oath ceremony is going to take place. So it depends on location, depends on many different factors, but if you were told that you will receive a letter in the mail with the date and time of your ceremony, that's fine too. Doesn't mean that your case was denied. So there is nothing to be stressed out about. So I hope that was helpful. And if you do have any questions, more questions about the citizenship interview, feel free to reach out to me at www.shoutsova.com or by calling my office 917-885-2261. Thank you.